you see, you're sitting right back on the saddle at the moment. Now I want to get you sitting in the saddle so that your seat bones are in the deepest part of the saddle. And what we're going to do is this. I'm coming round in front of you, and I'm taking your knees and I'm lifting them up, and now you can take hold of the saddle with your hands and lift yourself right forward. That's it. And even a little bit further forward, so that you might think that that was too far forward. But we'll be all right, because I just let your legs go so, and I just then come and I just take your hips and I just bring you a tiny little bit further back on your seat bones, and I think you're all right there, aren't you? That's quite comfortable. Now, having got you into the deepest part of the saddle, we're now ready to start work. And the first thing I do is I come round and I take one leg and I take the hamstrings under the knees with my fingers, and I lengthen the hamstrings. And you let me lengthen the hamstrings, you let the leg free like that. Now the hamstrings, of course, are attached to the seat bones, so that as I draw her knee towards me, I'm encouraging this right seat bone to come a little further forward in the saddle, a little bit more underneath her. And there we've got excellent lengthening there, and the leg is free. I put my hand underneath, so I turn the leg from the hip joint, and it goes down quite elegantly there beside the saddle. I now come and I do exactly the same with the other leg, and again it's the hamstrings. That's it. From the seat bone, drawing the seat bone underneath, lengthening the thigh, and so, and continuing to keep the length. I turn the thigh and the leg goes so. Now, gravity will take care of the legs now. We're not interested in the legs. Now, the next thing then that I've got to do, quite simply, is to come round to the back. And for this purpose, I think if you could help me, we could just turn her round. I think you would just slide her round. Yes, that's right. I think she'll slide all without any trouble. Right round, right round, right round, more. That's right. You can see there all right, can't you?
Lovely.
Now, what we do now is, having got the legs so, I now come and I put my hands on the crest of the pelvis, and I put my thumbs actually on the sacrum. And what I'm going to do, Lou, now is I'm going to press there. I'm using quite a bit of weight, and you're letting your legs go freely, you're letting your seat go. And I'm really pressing her seat bones down into the saddle. Right. And now, I think if we could move her again, if you could just move her a little bit that way, just a little bit more that way. There we are. That'll do splendidly. And now, Lou, all you're going to do now is you're going to think of letting your hip go forward and up, and you're just going to come back from the hip joints to my back here. There you are. There we go. There you go. There you go. You see, as you come back there. That's it. We get more lengthening there. And you see, just allow me to move you there now. There you are. That is now very free. We've got her organized on her seat bones. We've got the whole of the torso lengthening and widening, her head's going forward enough, and that's very nice. And the legs, you see, the legs don't come into it. Now, the origin of this was, we had a little girl years ago who got spina bifida, and consequently she couldn't stand or use her legs. And in order to work with her, we found that if we could sit her on a toy donkey, she could sit rather like this, and then we could work on her in a similar sort of way.
Was it Alexander, in the time of Alexander?
This was after the little girl had come to Alexander, but we had started to work on her in this way after Alexander died. And as she grew, we found that it was necessary to get something larger, so we had a wooden trestle made to continue to work in the same way. And then somebody suggested that if we were going to use a trestle, why not use a saddle, because saddles are made for that purpose. Mm-hmm. So that's how we came to get the saddle, because of course the saddle does give the proper support to the seat bones, and then you can get just what I've demonstrated. And we find nowadays that this is a very good thing for people who've got leg problems, we can get more lengthening of the leg, more freedom of the hip joints, freedom of the knees, freedom of the ankles in this way than we can even working on them lying down. Mm-hmm. It's very, very good from that point of view. And of course, for people who are riders, or people who want to ride, if you can do some of this work with them before they get on a horse, you've got 50% of the problem solved before you begin. Mm-hmm. So we have found this extremely valuable. I think that's all of that.
What changes in the thinking are you looking for in your students?
Inhibition, firstly, I think, and then able to give directions.
Uh-huh. Do you find that people have trouble grasping these things, or that, of course it varies from person to person, but do you find, well, what do you find?
No, I don't find when it's presented them in the right way, I don't find they have any trouble at all.
Can you say more about the right way?
Well, you can't say now you've got to inhibit and expect them to do it. You've got to ease them into it by suggesting they don't give a very quick response to things and give themselves time to think.
Mm-hmm. How do you know when someone's finished? I mean, I know 3 years are up, but I mean, what level, I mean, what tells you, their hands or the way they use themselves or the combination of those things?
The way they can use their hands and the way they keep their directions going in themselves while they use their hands, I think that's the main thing.
That's the main thing. Do you encounter the problem of students becoming self-conscious or sort of overly precious about the technique, you know, almost walking around, almost sort of walking around?
No.
No, never encountered that.
Very, very rarely. Used to 20 years ago, but not now.
Did something change in the last 20 years that somehow eliminated that, or?
Yes, I think so. We knew so much less about training and about reactions of people to what we were doing, that the students tended to feel they'd got to force themselves up all the time, which meant that they were stiffening and going around looking rather like zombies.
Mm. When did you detect, in other words, 20 years ago, people, in other words, were doing that more, and now you feel that that's been
Much
eliminated?
more. Now they don't do it.
What caused it 20 years ago that that's been eliminated?
Well, I think the emphasis was on going up. You felt you've got to go up all the time. And you weren't really told that what constituted going up and widening, you were just given the words, so you interpreted them as you thought. And that usually meant rather stiffening and going up.
Mm-hmm.
Going up like that.
Pushing
yourself up.
I see. What would you say is the hardest thing for the students to grasp? The thing they struggle with the most?
I think getting length in the legs.
Can you say more about that? I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, if you're going to get overall increase in stature, as FM put it, you've got to get length in the leg muscles as well, or get release in the leg muscles. And that is more difficult because most people spend a lot of time tightening their leg muscles. And students coming in don't know what you mean by that, and that's the thing that you really have to work to get them to understand, and it does take a little time.
Releasing the leg muscles.
Mm-hmm.
Do you sense any difference in the kinds of students you're getting now than 20 years ago, or any particular changes? Trends?
No, I don't think so.
Very much the same.
Much the same.
I think I asked some of the questions I wanted. Fred, do you have any questions? No? I think that might be enough.
Okay.
Okay, let me take that off. Thanks a lot.
No. Well, up to the time that Alexander died, of course, it was his training course, and he naturally had the responsibility for the training of the students and all the work that went on. And so although we were working with the students every day, we didn't feel that we'd got the burden of responsibility in the sense that they were his students rather than being, as it were, our students. Now, when he died, we got the news of his death in the course of a morning's work, and we didn't stop working, we just continued to work as usual. And from that point onwards, the work in the training course just went on just perfectly normally as usual. But, of course, I gradually began to realize more that he was no longer there.
Yeah.
And so, indeed, the responsibility was ours, was mine, and so although at first we continued just to work in the same way, gradually, of course, I had to consider and think. Particularly, one of the things that I realized was that, you see, when he was alive, if people wanted to ask any questions about the technique, they could ask him. But after he died, the only real source that we had was his books.
Yes.
So I wanted the students to read his books. I thought that the students all ought to be well familiar with his books. And of course, I found that it wasn't just sufficient to say to the students, read the books. And that's how it came about, that we started, first of all, to read the books aloud in class, and then, of course, I tried to supplement the reading with explanation as we went along. Mm-hmm. And so that introduced something into the work that we hadn't had previously. That was, in addition to the practical, what it's fashionable to call these days hands-on work, we now had a period in which Alexander's work, his books were being read and explained and discussed.
Right. I have some questions, yeah. One question is, were there any turning points in your understanding of the technique? In other words, was there a point in which you were stuck and suddenly one day, as Alexander describes in the use of cells, he suddenly has sort of a turning point?
Yes, I think that there was a very, very important turning point. Sometime before Alexander died, but equally shortly after I came back from the war, and that was when the various things had come together that enabled us to understand the physiology of the head-neck-back relationship much more clearly. Mm-hmm. You see, up to that point, I think Dart's paper, as a matter of fact, contributed a great deal to this, which came out in 1949. Yeah. And the crucial thing was this. We talk about the head going forward and up. What constitutes forward and what constitutes up? Mm-hmm. And from everything that had emerged at that time, it became clear to me that what we meant by forward, or what we meant by backward, was the movement from the atlanto-occipital joint there, the nodding, yes. You see, that being forward and that being back, yes. Forward and back. But the up was the effect of the total activity of the body, yes. That when the neck was free and the head was not being pulled back, then of course that release enabled lengthening to take place. Now I remember this as a turning point in my thinking, and I remember an absolutely specific occasion I can see in my mind's eye when I was able to talk to Alexander about this. And I put it to him and I said, now when we talk about the head going forward and back, we mean from the atlanto-occipital joint, and he said, yes, that's quite right. And I said, but it can't go up from that joint. And he said, no, of course it can't go up from there. That's not possible. It doesn't go up from there. But the going up is the total effect of on the whole body.
And forward, does the forward therefore mean slightly tilting on the condyles?
Yes, slightly tilting on the condyles. On the condyles. That's right. Yeah. Because, of course, you've got to remember that, as he says, it's primarily preventive. And what you're trying to prevent is the backward tilting on the condyles, because it's the backward tilting on the condyles that is happening all the time in people because of the tension of the extra tension of the neck. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the head going forward, it is to correct that backward tilt. So it doesn't mean that it's going a long, long way forward, although in order to get the stretch here you may have to exaggerate sometimes. Yeah. But in the ordinary way, what we're focusing on is not back, not back, not back. It mustn't go back. It must be free and not go back.
Thank you. I have another question also, which is one student said to me, if I could only understand what let means in let the neck be free.
Yes.
Could you say something about this word let? Because I find it an interesting word. It's not make the neck free, and it's not... What does let mean?
Well, let, of course, this exactly comes back to what I said about Alexander saying, I don't want you to do anything as you understand doing. Letting is very much a matter of understanding. Now, what you've got to understand is that all living things have got built into them machinery, if you like, that is designed to counteract all the forces that will otherwise take them down. Mm-hmm. And of course the obvious physical force is gravitation, but there are other forces as well that will tend to get people down. Now, that machinery is built in, and its function is to counteract the gravitational force and other forces, and so take people up. And it works as reliably as the heart or the circulation or the digestion, but it does become interfered with. And when it's interfered with, then it doesn't work properly. And the main way in which we interfere with it is by making muscular effort, by making too much muscular effort in different directions, which causes contraction and stops the flow of the energy that takes you up. So if you understand that, then you can say, now, I'm not going to do anything, but I'm going to let it happen. And of course, what I want to happen is I want to go up. I've got a clear conception in my mind of what's involved in going up, and I've also had a teacher's hands on me, so I've had the experience, I know what it feels like, and that's what I want. I want to go up. And I'm not going to move a muscle to do it, but I do want that. And it is getting the will and the wish organized in connection with that conception and understanding. And if you've got the wish for it to happen, then there's absolutely no reason why it wouldn't happen.
Thanks. I have one other question. In working with children, it seems that a lot of people see a lot of promise in the Alexander technique in working with children, but I wondered sometimes, how is it that Alexander expected children to direct and inhibit? Well, inhibit perhaps, but did he expect them to direct and inhibit? In other words, in working with children, can you expect those?
Yes, but of course, it depends on the age and the receptiveness of the child. And the ideal age for getting children really to respond in the way that we can hope adults will respond is about 11. At that sort of age, they can very often grasp the mechanics and find the mechanics of it very interesting, and they're quite intelligent about it, and then they'll inhibit and direct. Younger than that, no, mainly inhibition, but then growth is so strong and the feeling is so strong that their contrast between feeling of wrongness and rightness, that in a great many children, not all of them, but if you put a hand on them that gives the stimulus to go up instead of pulling down, and they respond to that as something they appreciate and they like, and they sort of feel, oh yes, that's what I like. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it responds at that level. You can get good... I mean, a good example of that was our own Richard, who when he was only 2 years of age had very severe breathing difficulties. He'd got pneumonia. And I came home on leave, and he was lying in his cot, and I was able to take his head gently, and taking his head freed his breathing. Yes. Well, Richard, all his life, he's never forgotten that. It sold him on the technique from that age onwards, because he realized that there was something there that freed his breathing and helped him.
Yes. Do you have another question?
Yes, whilst you are speaking of children and of education, no doubt about it, Alexander technique is an aid for everything, to live.
Yes.
To live openly, to be free.
Yes.
Do you find that philosophically it helps your children to develop more freely than, say, somebody who would have never ever heard about Alexander?
Yes, I would say that I do think so, quite definitely. I think that the Alexander technique does give the possibility of a new understanding of freedom, because although children have to, it's very important for them to learn what not to do, at the same time they don't want to be taught that in a repressive way. They want to be taught it in a rational way, a conscious way, as far as possible. And I think the other thing is that everybody connected with the technique realizes how damaging fear is how fear reactions cause pulling down and so on. So the more you can structure a child's environment and upbringing and so on to avoid fear and anxiety, the more you can reinforce without fear, the better. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, people like Summerhills and what's his name? A.S. Neil and so on, they'd all agree with that. I mean, that's all absolutely right. But as FM used to say, of course, all those people, what they had the idea, they had the concept, but they hadn't got the means whereby to put it into operation. And you need the actual physical means whereby, that's to say, you've got to get people, you've got to give them the experience of the freedom of the neck and the head going forward and up. It's no good giving them a sense of freedom if they're pulling down and so on.
Speaking philosophically, as we speak now, and psychologically, it is many people have developed this idea, and it's a fact that we as human animals or human people are living constantly in a sort of anxiety.
Yes.
Because of the civilization, but even if not because of the civilization, the mere fact that we are conscious and that we are faced with the finiteness of life.
Yes.
And we know that it's not going to be forever.
Yes.
We live in a constant anxiety, and
yes.
Freud and other people have said that this causes repressions and also other things, problems, plus the civilization, the technology, which with the telephone, with the traffic, etc. Now, what do you think? Alexander never spoke philosophically about death specifically. What would you say? How can Alexander help life, being?
Well, I think the answer to that, in my mind, I have no doubt what the answer is about that, because you see, I believe that all these people who have quite rightly identified the prevalence of fear and anxiety from so many different causes and so many reasons, and I mean that's undeniable, what they've overlooked is the fact that the modern generation, the fundamental fear and anxiety in the modern generation is instability in poise. Quite literally, the postural mechanism works so defectively that human beings go about the place in danger of falling over, in danger of losing their physical equilibrium. At the back of their feelings all the time, people feel unstable for absolutely sheer physical reasons without any other considerations coming into it whatsoever. I mean, all the others are on top of that. But you've got people who pull down, people who don't have the primary control working, are physically insecure, and then all the other insecurities come in on top of it. Yeah. Whereas if you can manage to get somebody into a state of relative physical security so that they feel confident that their physical balance and posture is not menaced, then they can absorb a great deal of fear and anxiety and all the rest of it without it really disturbing them and upsetting them. And I believe that that's the real answer.
And Alexander says something like that, and people are living in a state of constant irritation, he says.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely, they are. They are, yes, they are.
But would you say then that Alexander technique itself is a meaning in life, is a meaning, or is it just a tool, an aid to go further?
Well, I think that it's primarily a tool to go further, but I think that in going further, I think new experience and new insight is gained. And I think that also the experience and insight you get enables you to evaluate a lot of theoretical concepts, a lot of other people's theoretical insights, many of which are very valuable, like A.S. Neal and so on. But with these things, you do need a practical means whereby you're doing it. So what I'm saying is, no, Alexander isn't the answer to everything. No, we all have all kinds of problems, and we need all the help that we can get. But Alexander does contribute one fundamental ingredient towards the solution, one indispensable ingredient.
One more question? You can, you ask. Well, my other question is that Lily Westphal says that Alexander faults modern man, but also the students in the class for lacking what he calls nous, N-O-U-S, which means sort of willpower, the ability to sit around and work it all out themselves, as Alexander worked it out himself. Do you think that Alexander was expecting that of the students, and do you think fundamentally one has to work it out by oneself in the end?
Well, I think, yes, I think that to a certain extent, quite a large extent, Alexander was expecting that. And the reason I think that was because if you consider his Australian background and his upbringing in the very remote conditions that he was brought up in, where self-reliance was a necessity of life and a certain outlook was inevitable, and of self-reliance, independence, observation, you had to be your own expert and so on. That was what he looked for and rather expected, and was disappointed not to find.
I have two questions. Number one is, what do you consider the most important contribution of Alexander, if one could say anything? Number one question. And the second question is habits. Some people are speaking of that the old habit should be replaced by new habits, or they should not, or the old habit should be replaced by all the time new experiences. If you could maybe elaborate on these 2 points.
Well, as for the first point, there's no doubt in my mind that the real important contribution that Alexander made was the realization that the fundamental requirement for human beings, as for all living things, is that nothing gets you down. So that he saw that it was necessary, as he put it, to lengthen in stature when he went to speak, that you needed to go up, and as we say in our jargon, to keep your length, and to do things on that basis. And of course, that realization absolutely is confirmed by the latest physiology, on research on the postural mechanism, on the fundamental processes of life, as brought in question by space research and all the rest of it. So yes, I think that was, you've got to identify that. As above all, the realization that the human organism will only function effectively when going down is avoided. The second thing is that he does say actually quite a lot about habit, particularly in man's supreme inheritance, and I think it's pretty clear from what he says there, and certainly it's confirmed by what I know and so on, that you are trying, of course, to get rid of old maladaptive habits. you are trying to install new habits. We need habits. We need habits more than ever in this current age, where there are so many stimuli, where there's so much change, there's so many things, different things going on. We need habits, but we need habits that have been formed on a conscious basis, on a conscious, rational, intelligent basis, and not just subconsciously and haphazardly. And then you've got a set of habits that you can, so to speak, you can switch over to automatic. You can let the automatic machinery work, but in the confidence that if it doesn't work to your satisfaction, if something goes wrong, you can switch over to manual and deal with the situation.
And the last question, and obviously, as you are the leader, a leading figure in the Alexander world, and you made so much contribution to the Alexander world, I don't know whether you want to answer this or not. The question of the schism in the technique, and the schism has taken place in all other professions, in psychology, in psychiatry, etc., which really crippled the other professions.
Yes.
How will Alexander, how do you see Alexander technique hence 100 years?
Well,
Of this?
well, I take a very optimistic view about this, particularly after the Congress in America the year before last, because we had there representatives of all the different schools and approaches, and it did seem to me and to other people that I've talked to that there was strong evidence that our common ground of agreement was very, very much stronger than our differences. And I think in all human things, in any group of people, there are bound to be problems and difficulties with people getting on with each other and having their own idea and so on. But fundamentally, I'm optimistic enough to believe that the basic principles, if you like, the basic concept of Alexander is very much alive and well, and I don't think there's a deep split. I don't think there's a fundamental difference of opinion there. I think that the differences that there are very much more differences of emphasis, and also the purely human things of human interaction. So I'm very optimistic about the future.
The last question, if I may. This is Alexander technique at the moment is still an elitist sort of technique and form of discipline, let's put it this way. How do you see can the Alexander technique more popularized to go into the masses? Can you see any way, say, for the future, any possibility to popularize it?
Well, the only way in which I see that as a real practical possibility is the training of more teachers. I think that as more teachers become available, I think more and more can and will be done in that way. I think the general climate of opinion in many different directions will incline to lead to more to procedures in education and so on, more compatible with Alexander ideas, and I think that the limitation is always going to be the number of teachers available, who can actually do the work.
Could Alexander technique be taught universities, school, and in groups?
Oh yes, it can certainly be so, but it inevitably needs quite an amount of individual instruction as well. That's the limiting factor. You can't do it without individual instruction.
But it could be in groups.
Well, Alexander's training course was in groups. He worked with children and was in groups. He worked with children, he worked with groups from very, very early time in his own teaching, but not as an alternative to individual work, but in supplement to it.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Good, fine.